Yes, let's get into it. So, I am back on here right now because we need to talk about the nurses' strike. And before everybody gets all hot and bothered, let me just say this. I myself am not on one side or the other. I wanted to think about how I wanted to say that because I know this is a very hot topic for a lot of people. I am not trying to say that nurses have to strike. I'm actually not for striking 100% in the sense of patient care, but I'm also very pro nurse. And I think that sometimes in the landscape that we live in with our healthcare system, after seeing it for almost a quarter century, I have learned from being a union member and being a non-union member, from being a rep, from being in the room during negotiations. Yes, I have been in the room, and it's a very tentative situation, tense situation that usually runs all the way down to the wire on the clock. And what happens in these situations is the bargaining that goes on. It's hard to get some as a nurse. It can be like, God, I'm tripping on my words, and I don't mean to be doing that because I want to be real careful what I say right now because I know this is very touchy for a lot of people. You gain inches during contract negotiations and finalization of a contract. It takes gaining inches over years in order to make headway for nurses and representatives and everyone else to try to improve patient care. And nurses do not go on strike because they just want more money or they're just trying to be greedy. It comes down to really wanting to help patients. And because of the fact that nursing conditions have been so awful since the pandemic hit, things have just kind of unwound over a period of time. And if you look all over anywhere on the internet, on socials, on TikTok, on anywhere else, people are upset. Nurses are all upset. Patients are all upset. People are firing shots back and forth. And what we have to remember is nurses are pro-patient. They want to make sure, I want to make sure that patients are getting the best care possible. And the only way to do that is to try to keep our practice tight. And it's really hard to do that when we have way too many patients or assignments just don't measure up to what the needs are of the patients in a population that you're serving. So what we have to remember during this strike or this potential strike is that nurses are really doing this. When I have read everything online, I've actually gone in, read what they're trying to fight for. You get a sense that the nurses are really trying to protect the patients. This isn't just about money. If it was just about money, it would be a lot easier, but it's not. The one thing I noticed with the New York Presbyterian pulling out, they've rescinded the strike notice, which they're saying they could go back and they could at any time put it back on. They're rescinding it at this time, and they've come to an agreement on salaries, on holidays, on other issues. But the one thing that really struck out to me in this was they did not come to an agreement about staffing ratios. That was concerning. So what we're looking at in New York City right now is a tinderbox. There is a lot of tension. There is a lot going on. There's a lot of patients that need to be served right now. And it's really hard to provide care when you don't have enough staff. Nurses are burnt out. They are crispy fried right now. And they can't seem to get anywhere with their administration. So the only recourse they have is to do it through their unions. And that's what's supposed to happen here. Nursing unions are supposed to bargain and work for contracts, but when they can't come to an agreement, that's where we get to this point where strikes are potential or a potential. So I highly doubt all of these hospitals will go on strike at the stroke of midnight on the 9th. Usually what happens is the clock runs down to the very end and an agreement is met, because at the end of the day, most nurses do not want to see a strike. Most nurses really don't want to see patients being forced into care with people who don't know the hospital system. It's always a bad mix when you have people just coming in out of nowhere who don't know the systems, and patient care is going to be declining no matter what. One of the things I want to touch on here too is we all have the right to our opinion. And on talking on this platform, I want to remind everyone that, I have my right to my opinion and you have the right to yours, and we all have a right to express it. And I hope that we can do that in a respectful way. There's no need for hate speech. There's no need for yelling out at someone, but I think to have a conversation is really important. I did get a couple negative comments about my recent shorts I posted, just, saying, asking nurses not to cross that picket line. But what my main thing on that was not that I don't want nurses to cross it for the sense of patients not getting care. I want nurses to consider what they're getting into when they do cross the picket line. Because if you've ever gone in on an emergency staffing contract, there are issues with the fact that you're going to be worked to the bare bone. I mean, you're going to have very minimal resources. You're going to be really short staffed. You're going to be working 12 to 18 hour shifts. You're going to be working 7 days a week. You are going to be burnt out. You are going to be used to the max, and there will be no ratios or anything else implied. I see a comment on here from someone. A lot of issues we're seeing have been around for a while. The pandemic just exacerbated the issues that have been there. And you are so right. Absolutely right. And I hope I pronounce your name right, Sensei. Adios. But it is so true. The issues have been there since the pandemic, and they have been there since before the pandemic. The pandemic just exacerbated what was already there. And I don't know if you work in healthcare, but a lot of us who have been around, we've seen this whole ebbs and flows of things. I've seen it over 20 some odd years now. And there comes a point too where when things like the pandemic happen, they force us to reevaluate what's going on in healthcare, what's going on in our environment, how we can do better. And I know that for myself and a lot of other nurses out there, there was a lot of information coming in on a daily basis where we were having to make adjustments. We were taking on massive patient care loads. There was just so much happening. And at the same time, the healthcare system wasn't really expanding much. There were emergency facilities that were going into play, but there was also a lot of stuff that was being added on to loads and that kind of thing. I just want to say that we all have the right to our opinion. I might say something on here you might not agree with, and I want to hear comments on that, because I think that nursing strikes, nursing things that go on this platform, we have to have conversations about it. I want to support the nurses in New York City because they are under a lot of stress. Nurses do not want to strike. I know the nurses that are out there, and I would love to hear from some of them in New York. I know they don't want to strike. They want to be there for their patients. They want to provide good care. But what I would like to see in these contracts is two things. One, I'd like to see something about nursing ratios, and I haven't heard a lot about that being brought forth as far as the discussions. And once I read through the contract that New York Presbyterian went ahead and approved, it didn't say anything about ratios. I was a little bummed about that. I was hoping we would see that, but we did not. There are still 7 other hospitals that still have contracts that are being negotiated at this time. And I really hope that the New York Presbyterian contract that is tentative, that there will continue to be adjustments in that contract before the finalization of the deadlines on that. My understanding, it has to be ratified by 4,000 nurses right now. So it hasn't been ratified yet, and we'll see what happens. If you are a nurse and you are considering, crossing the lines, I don't knock you for doing it. I just want you to go into it with the idea that when you get there, you have to have your skill set really strong going in. You have to know your area of specialty. You have to be flexible. You have to be willing to float. You have to be willing to do extensive hours. You have to be willing to front your travel expenses to get there in hopes that the travel agency will reimburse you very quickly. You're going to pay a lot more for your trip going out there. You're probably going to, I don't know if they're, U.S. staffing, there was a very minimal data on what they were saying they would cover. I know that they will cover housing. You may be bunking up with anywhere from 2 to 4 people in your hotel room. I know this to be true because I have done contracts that are crisis contracts. You will be bunking up with other people you do not know. You will be just going to your room to sleep. There will be no downtime, and you will be working 7 days a week. Endless hours, back to back to back to back, and you might be making $125 an hour. Supposedly, that's what it said on the last contract I read. But what you have to remember is that's your 12-hour rate. That's the 8 hours plus the 4 hours time and a half leveraged over the 12, and you might make $1,200 in a shift, but you have to pay taxes on that. And when you get those big checks, your tax rate is usually over 50%. You can check me on this. I promise you, it is true. Your tax rate can be anywhere from 50 to 60%. And when you think you're getting this giant fat check, Are you really making more there than you would be serving patients at home? So I really, don't want to see the strike happen. I pray that it doesn't, but I hope that some groundwork is laid and that there is conversations going on, that there is safety. There's so many things. It's hard to even go into all of it without reading all the notes I took on this. And I'm going to put some links in the replay because there's some information about the contract, information about the hospitals, information about New York State Nursing Association, the NYSNA. I also understand that the NYSNA merged with NNU, which is the National Nursing Union, which is also part of CNA. So their power of and their purview covers many, many, many states. So I see some more comments coming in, and it says, I can see the appeal of unions. To me personally, the union needs to work to make conditions safe for nurses to practice and improve patient care. Yes, amen to that. 110%. I believe that. It all depends on the people and the hospitals involved. Yes, and it depends on your representatives and your bargaining agreement. Who are your reps that have been elected to represent you, because they are the ultimate decision makers. They do have to discuss it with other reps, but you have to make sure that the people that you elect and that you take part in those elections are actually representing what you as a core of your nursing body hold as your core of importance and what you would like to see done. I really am disappointed to see that there was nothing about staffing ratios in this, because that has been the hot button throughout this whole pandemic, is how many patients to nurses. We have seen things from state to state where nurses' licenses are being held accountable for hospitals who put 40 patients or 50 patients for one nurse, and then the nurse can't get her tasks done. And when the CMS comes in to investigate, the hospital will throw a nurse under the bus as their, this is what we did about it. We're going to discipline this nurse, and we're, getting rid of this person and disciplining this person, but nothing changed at the facility. I myself have been in situations where I have walked in and been in charge of over 46 patients at one time in an emergency department. That happened one time. And I can promise you it is something I never, ever, ever want to do ever again, because the entire shift I prayed to God that nobody died. It was the scariest thing I've ever been through in my career. And in going through something like that, you really understand that, one, you're just one person. Administration is a lot more powerful, but they're usually sitting at home in the comfort of their home, not having to experience the level of stress that goes on in a nurse's mind when she knows she has a lot of lives at risk in her care or his care. And I don't mean to say she, I'm just talking about myself personally. I want to see things about patient safety. I want to see things about abuse clauses where abuse isn't tolerated. In the patient Bill of Rights, there's also a Bill of Rights that the patient is expected to do when they get in there. When they are medically cleared by a physician, if there is abuse present, that they can be discharged. There needs to be some more information about abuse clauses and what nurses have to tolerate. Because right now, as it stands, there isn't anything to protect the nurses should a patient get abusive. There might be security, there might be things like that, but the hospitals aren't backing the nurses when there's abuse present. So I'd like to see something in the clause that the hospitals would be making a full step forward on trying to see that abuse doesn't happen. I also want to see that nursing unions are really in contact with their nursing body, other than through one email during a certain several month period about what's happening. Because a lot of people miss those kind of emails. There needs to be bigger, discussions going on, meetings where nurses can zoom in and talk to their representatives directly, because a lot of representatives don't make themselves known. I have been part of a nursing union. I was part of CNA many years ago when I worked for a county body, and our nurse rep and the person who was our main body in the contract negotiation, she was walking around all the time at the hospital. She was talking to nurses. She was really in it, and she was a dog with a bone. And I appreciated the fact that she really understood what was going on with us all the time, and that was a really good rep. I understand that not all reps work the same, but that's where we have to pressure. That's where we have to be really calculated in who we elect to be our representatives. So, I'm not just all pro union. I know that in some places I work too, it can be really hard to deal with problematic employees because the union protects everybody. And once an employee gets to a certain point, it's hard to terminate. And it takes a lot of documentation, which it should to a degree, because bullying and all the other stuff that we know goes on in healthcare is really present. But unions also tend to protect people who shouldn't be continuing to work and be part of the body they represent. But that's what they do. They are there to protect nurses, but nurses are there to protect patients. And I really hate seeing all this stuff going on online where it's this battle of nurse versus patient. Nurses shouldn't be trusted. And there's just a level of distrust that's going on, kind of like what we saw a few years ago with the public and the police. People aren't trusting nurses as much as they used to, and it's sad. It really bothers me. I feel like we have lost the trust. I don't know how exactly that happened. I kind of have an idea when I see some of the stuff that goes on over on TikTok and Instagram where people are posting things that are really inappropriate to post. I see that you said, I need to read into this more, but there's a video from the NYT called Hospital Greed is Killing Our Nurses. They mentioned that there has been attempts to create legislation for staffing ratios. I'm tripping my words again. Yes. So I can give you some information on that, and I will post it in the link below. There are 2 bills currently going on between the Senate and the House. Now, in order to have a bill enacted through Congress, it has to go through the Senate and then the House. There are 2 bills. There is a Senate bill and a House bill. The House bill has gotten a lot further, but both of those bills stalled out in May of 2021. I have been digging for information on this, and I'm still trying to work on getting more information as to why they have been stalled out since 2021. It doesn't look like they're getting a ton of support. It looks like there needs to be a lot more signatures from the senators to continue to go on to pass. Those ratio laws are currently sitting there waiting to go on. They have been read. One has been read twice through the House. It's been acknowledged, and it's currently sitting. Right now in our country, out of the 50 states, we only have 2 states that actually have safe staffing ratios. I currently live in one of them, which is the state of California. We have Title 22. The problem with the fact that the rest of the country doesn't do this is it has created a disproportionate level of care that patients are getting across the country. But we have seen something with nurse staffing ratios that's really important. When this was passed in 2004, there's been a lot of data that has been collected since 2004, since the California state passed Title 22. That bill in itself, if you go online and you look up Title 22 and you read exactly what that means and how many patients each unit a nurse can have in the unit, and it's very detailed. I would love to see that same title passed in other states, because what we've learned is there are lower infection rates, there is less mortality in patients. There are so many positives that have been studied and found to be true, including the cost of patient stays goes way down for each patient when the ratios are diminished. So there's a lot of reasons why it should pass, and they all have to be based in patient care. And what we have to remember with nurse ratios is they're not easy to put into effect. And we have a lot of hospitals that push back, but at the same time, what we have to remind our administrators of, and do it gently and with tact, is that the data supports that the cost to the hospital, if they enact the ratios, is actually less in the long run. So they're kind of being penny wise and pound foolish, and I think that if a lot more states came on board with the nursing ratio laws, I think we would see a lot better patient care outcomes in the long run. We would see less burnout of nurses in the long run, and I think you'd have more retention of nurses in their places where they tend to work. Do you think the hospital industry has been resistant to these necessary changes? Yes, I do. I became a nurse in 2000 before the nurse ratios were implemented. As I went on in my practice, there was a time from about 2004 to 2006, even after they were passed, that hospitals were still resistant to them, but then they were kind of forced into it, because if they weren't abiding by the titles in Title 22, their payment rate was affected and they were penalized. Call me crazy, but I think they are. Oh, they absolutely are. And what I was getting at with my point is, yes, I have seen hospitals be resistant to the change. When I told you about that experience earlier where I walked into an emergency department, I was in charge. I was the only MICN. I was the only RN on duty, and I had 46 patients assigned all to me. There were literally over 22 patients in the back in the ER, and there were 24 waiting to be seen. And that, like I said, was scary. But that hospital was very resistant to change. And the next day, when I went back to talk to administration about it, I took Title 22 in with me, and I said, look, this is where we're failing. This is where the hospital's failing. You're not abiding by the guidelines. And I was told, and this was beyond 2004 after it was enacted, that those were just guidelines. And they were not just guidelines, they were laws. And administrators took over almost 2 years to come around to the point that they understood fully what laws versus guidelines meant. And they had to face serious fines for doing what they were doing before they realized they had to do it. So there was like a push back, a push forward, a push back, and it doesn't happen overnight. And the same with like these nursing unions and these contracts that they're trying to negotiate. Anytime anything happens, including implementing ratios, you gain inches, not feet or yards. And what we have to remember is that even 3 inches gained is worth something. And you get to a point in this industry where you can either get completely burned out and leave the practice, or you can kind of say the serenity prayer to yourself and accept things as they are to a degree and change what you can. Can't change the world, can't save the world. You can do your part to do well for your patients, be a great nurse, take care of everybody to the best of your ability, work within your scope. And at the end of the day, you got to continue to push, even though it's hard, for changes. And I want to see those changes happen here. I want to see them happen all over the country. But I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I think it's going to be a very long time before we see this. But I do hope that people will reach out to their legislators, their senators in their state, and continue to write to them and tell them that they feel this is important. That's one of the things that makes me hesitant to transition to ER nursing. We don't have those ratio laws in Texas. I don't want anyone to get hurt because I was so overwhelmed. I totally get it. There are, your administrations do kind of guide where that goes. Yeah, it could happen. And you don't want anyone to get hurt. And all you can do is take an assignment despite objection. Even if you're not in a nursing union, you do have the right to submit a document that's an ADO. It's called an ADO, assignment despite objection. Anytime you go into transitioning into something like ER, you don't know the whole ER overnight. You're not expected to know everything. And for most of the time you're working in your practice, you're learning and you're working with teams. And your teams are the ones that save you. And I will tell you that night that I had the crazy 46 patients to myself, it was my team within the hospital that did save me. I didn't have other ER nurses, but I did have a house supervisor who scrambled to get med-surg nurses or whoever they could find to just sit and go out into the lobby and see what they could get, vital signs or text to do anything they could. It's hard and it's scary. ER nursing is its own animal. It's not inpatient. I've done intensive care, ICU, surgical ICU, cardiothoracic, and then ER. And I will tell you, ER is very different than working inpatient because anything goes in the ER and you can get a trauma out of nowhere and you can have multiple people bleeding out or heart attacks or anything else going on. And you have to be really strong in your practice. That is why a lot of ERs tell you they want you to have been a nurse for a couple years before you come in. They want to know that you have your systems down. You understand patient care. You understand all the things that can go on and that can go wrong. And it takes at least a couple of years in your practice before you are truly a master at what you do. And even after 22 years, I promise you, I am still learning. I learn new things every single day. I am shocked and amazed at things that I see going on in the practice. And I'm appalled by things that I think about that we did 20-something years ago. But I will tell you, you're always learning. Count on your teams. But if I can say anything about ER nursing, it's my favorite. It's my home. And I have to say I love my ER people out there because ER people are team people. They got your back. They might want to claw your eyes out and talk smack to your face in 1 minute because you're like this crazy, incestuous, weird family and everybody knows everybody's business. But at the same time, they're going to be the first people that have your back in the time of need. So ER people are usually more flexible than others. If you're going to go to an ER in Texas, I would tell you go to a teaching hospital where they have residents there. Residents are learning, you're learning, everybody's learning together, and there's seldom going to be a time when you're ever completely alone. Whenever there's a resident type of academic medicine system going on, it's a teaching hospital, and they're usually focused on teaching and providing support systems to everybody that's there in the hospital. There's always an attending on call. So if you can do it, get into a teaching hospital, get somewhere where they're going to put you through a new grad program if they're willing. And if that isn't possible, then go into a community ER that is really heavily focused on training new people. So I hope that explains that for you on that part. I don't ever want to discourage anyone from going into nursing because I love it. It has been part of my whole world since I became a nurse in 2000. I do have moments where I feel burnout. I don't want to continue doing it. I want to say, forget it, I'm never coming back. But, all in all, I think it's an amazing practice, and I'm grateful that I've had the time that I have in it. That doesn't mean I won't want to retire tomorrow, I promise you. But for right now, I still love it, and I stay in it not because of all the chaos that's going on in the world. I still feel like if I'm in it, I can still promote changes within it. And I want to do that from within. I don't want to leave the practice and try to work from the outside in. I want to work from the inside out. So I'm going to continue to do that. And I'm going to continue to come on here. I'm going to continue to talk about things. I want to continue to have discussions about how we can make the practice better. I'm grateful that the platforms that are available right now are here because now we can have our voices heard. And if nothing else, I want to be a positive voice for young nurses out there, for new grads. I want to let them know that not all experienced nurses are nurse ratchet and are going to be terrible to them. There are those of us out there that want to lead in what we do. So part of it too is getting into the ER. I made attempts in the past, but I don't think I knew the right folks. I know how that goes. Only say this because I've done med surg for 4 years prior to applying. Okay, so let me tell you this. Don't get discouraged. I know how that goes, and I know what you mean about not knowing the right folks. But let me tell you this. Have you ever floated to the ER? Because one of my other videos, I talked about this. I did some shorts on it, and it was like when I first started the channel. The best way to get into the ER, if you are a med surg nurse or you're working on the floor, is be willing to float. At some point in time, they're going to need people to float, and every shift you go to your house supervisor and say, hey, if they need floating to the ER, I'm here. I'd like to try. When you go down to the ER, I promise you they will not throw you to the wolves. We never do that. If someone comes down to help, we look at it as a resource. We're just grateful to have you there, and we're going to teach you things. And if you get yourself down there and people start to get to know you, and you can start to prove who you are and that you're willing to learn, that you'll be the first one hired. That's what I used to do when I was, doing the hiring myself. When I would see people coming from other floors that I got to know because they were willing to float and they weren't afraid to come down there, those were the first people I went to bring on to train. So those people, you got to get yourself known. You got to get your face in there. If you work in the hospital, find out who the ER director is. Call them. See if you can have a 10-minute sit down. Just ask them for a few minutes of their time. If they tell you no, be pushy. The pushier you are, you keep doing it, they're going to come around. So I need to get out more, I guess. Me too. Trust me. So do I sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes instead of going out, I plan my next video, or I'm writing to the legislature, or I'm trying to promote something with nursing, but it kind of becomes your whole being. It's hard too when you work in the practice and you're exhausted at the end of your shifts. There's nothing left in you, and getting out and doing much more than just laying in the bed in a coma state, it's hard to do sometimes. But get out of your comfort zone if you're in med surg. We get in this tunnel vision of just doing what we do, but get out of that comfort zone. Go down to the ER. See if you can help out. If there's nothing going on your floor, ask if you can go down there. Ask if you can just watch it. Look around. See what's going on. Because you know what? They're never going to tell you no. Very rarely are they going to tell you you're not allowed to come down there. If they need a warm body and they need somebody to help, even if it's sitting for a patient or anything else, go down there and get your peepers known, introduce yourself, talk to people, work on your resume, focus on all the skills that you have, keep that resume handy. And there's an email list at every hospital. You have access to that if you work at the hospital. Shoot off your resume to people. Find out the director of nursing's email. Write a good cover letter. Explain why you want to be there. If you want it, you kind of got to push for it sometimes. So if there's a will, there's a way. I didn't just walk into an ER and get the job. Literally, I had to push for it too. And, I started as an ER ward secretary. I did my time there. I went to school. And even when I got out of school, I didn't get hired right back into the ER. I had to go out, do a new grad program, learn intensive care, work there for 3 years, and then ask for a job and push myself back in. And that happened through registry. I was working intensive care doing registry, and I started getting floated down to the ER. And I'm like, I'll go. I kind of know the flow anyway because I used to work there. I didn't know the first thing about being a nurse in the ER when I first went to ER, but I learned. So you learn as you go, and usually you find mentors. Find somebody who's a good mentor in the ER too. When you get down there, you can see who's good at doing what they do and who's open to talking to you. And once you start establishing those relationships and you ask to watch what they're doing or assist or see what's going on in a procedure, or if you hear a code blue going on in the ER, which is rare that they call codes, get yourself down there. Get down to the code. Be the documenter. Just offer to do something, even if it's just running the labs to the lab. Get yourself down there and get known, and don't be afraid. I just did a video a couple days ago talking about code blues. If there's a code, get in that code. Anywhere in the hospital, get your experience. It's scary. You feel like your heart's going to pound out of your neck at the time that it's going on, but get in there and do something. Everybody can have a role. It's important to just go down and do something. And if you don't know what to do, just be the documenter. Offer to do that, or just offer to be the runner. So I hope that explains some things. I know we kind of diverted off the whole thing with nursing unions, but I did want to get in here and talk about the nursing union and the strike. And I just want to say that I do support the nurses. I do support the union on this one. I'm hoping that they make some headway. I pray that they don't strike. I want to see that, things get done on this, and I want to see that, some inches are made, if not feet, which would be awesome. I hope that they don't strike for the patient's sake. And for the nurses that do go in there, I just want you to go in with your eyes wide open and be aware of what you're getting into when you go. So I am going to go ahead and end this live stream. It's getting a little bit later, but to you, Sensei, thank you for coming. I'm really glad that we got to have this chat on here. Please come back. I will continue to post more. I'm trying to get on here and do lives as much as I can, but I have to use Prism because I don't have 1,000 subscribers yet. And so until I do, I'm going to have to continue to do it this way. And it's a little bit harder than doing it from the computer and streaming live through YouTube, but I'm going to try. So if you haven't subscribed, I would love it if you did. And I would always appreciate the subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications, and you'll hear about my next live streams coming up. But I am going to be using the live stream format because I don't like to do recordings of videos and try to edit. That's just too much for me. I would rather come in here, talk off the cuff, and have real honest conversations. So I hope all of you are having a very wonderful new year. You are welcome for the advice and the live stream. And please tune in and please subscribe so you have a very happy new year. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.